Hello and welcome to Talking Law. I'm Sally Penni MBE, a barrister at Kenworthy Chambers in Manchester. I'm also the Joint Vice Chair of the Association of Women Barristers and the founder of Women in the Law UK. On this podcast, you'll hear leading barristers, judges, solicitors, managing partners, and more talk about their lives and careers within the legal sector. Today I'm talking law with Dr. Leroy Logan MBE, a former Superintendent in the Metropolitan Police and recent keynote speaker at the Bar Council's Race Summit. Leroy is one of the UK's most highly decorated black police officers. He's also a former chair and founding member of the Black Police Association and believes that there is still much work to do in creating a more equitable and fair criminal justice system. I began our interview by asking Leroy about his upbringing and career path into policing.
I was born in Islington and grew up there and a few years in Jamaica as a youngster, and then I finished my education in Hackney, where I did my A-levels, and then went on to do my degree in University of East London. So, London born and bred, and I thought my life in science research was charted out until the calling of policing sort of caught me on the blind side, and I joined in 1983, where I did 30 years, more or less, in the north side of the Met, and bit of central London, northeast. Went all over in terms of surveillance work, but I suppose the main thing I was heavily involved in the latter stages of my 30 years was setting up the Black Police Association, not just London, but nationally. I was the first chair of the National BPA, and then I was the London chair for a few years. And operationally, I was fortunate to be involved in extensive inquiries, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, the Damilola Taylor investigation, and various other homicide investigations. And I was fortunate to finish my career off on the Olympic security team for the 2012 Games, where it was a life-changing experience, which gave me a real understanding of Team GB. I'm not just talking about the athletes, but people across the country coming together and making it a memorable games, and still living the legacy, because I still live in that area in East London, and I'm still involved in advocacy and activism work. And I suppose the main thing since I retired in 2013 has been my autobiography, Closing Ranks, My Life as a Cop, and leading on to the film by Steve McQueen called Red, White and Blue, where John Boyega played me. So, I'm living on that crest of a wave, part of the Small Axe family. And it's given me so many opportunities. It's been life-changing. So, I'm a rejuvenated man.
Wow. Well, I'll come to rejuvenation and well-being a bit later on, if I may. I watched the series by Steve McQueen, which was celebrating Black history, and your story, as most people, the nation will have watched, was a powerful one. I don't want to tell your story through myself, but I wonder if you can just tell us really how that came about, that your life as a police officer then was made into a drama, a rather successful drama, an award-winning one. Why you felt that story was so important?
Well, I was in the process of writing my autobiography. In fact, I've been writing it for since 2010. When I knew I was going to be leaving after the Olympic Games, it was part of my exit strategy, trying to make sense of what happened the previous 20 odd years and saying, where's the legacy? Where's the next steps? And around 2015, I was approached by a journalist who I used to work with. She used to be part of the BBC. Her name is Helen Bart. And I worked with her, especially when I was chair of the Black Police Association. various issues that were in the media. And she had left the BBC by 2015, and she was doing some freelance work. She said, Leroy, I know your story, and I really believe someone who could make a film out of it, but I need you to dictate that story to me, which I did, because I know her and I trusted her. And she went away. A few months later, in 2016, she said, oh, that tape has come to the attention of Steve McQueen. And I said, Steve McQueen, 12 Years a Slave, Steve McQueen, just won the Oscar. She said, yeah, he's really interested in looking at it being part of a series. And it didn't have a name at the time, but it was a series that was going to be on BBC. And I said, wow, that's amazing. So I met Steve later that year, around the spring of 2016. And we got on really well. I didn't want to take it for granted that my story was going to be that well known, because at the time when they were looking at it, they weren't going to have my actual name. They were going to be fictitious names. But I helped out with the script, working with Steve and Courtier Newland, who was the other script writer. And I was really pleased to be involved behind the scenes in that way. And that took us through 2017, 2018, and then the filming started. So I was involved in a bit of a pre-production work and going on set in sunny Wolverhampton, where it was filmed, because there's not many buildings in London that is still dated from that time period. They each of the Small Axe episodes wanted to be spanning between 60s and the 80s.
Yeah. And
so each one was in that scope of the 60s and 80s of Caribbean people who've done things that have been seen as significant. And so, but it was so surreal seeing John Boyega not only wanting to play me, but actually acting like me, talking like me, walking like me. And and then it's only when I went on the set and I noticed the script and it said Leroy said, and Lee said, and I thought, hold on here, that's, you use my name. He said, yeah, didn't tell you we're going to use your name. And that's what I knew it was going to be really significant. And the production went out in November 2020, and I released my book, my autobiography, Closing Ranks, a couple of months before then, because how it just seemed to work in unison. And the rest is history. I really pleased how it was accepted by the community of all backgrounds and experiences. And not just my episode, Red, White and Blue, but Lovers Rock, Mangrove, Education, and Alex Wheatle. And it's been, again, a life-changing experience, which I'm still sort of pinching myself to say if it was all a dream, whatever. But no, it's opened doors. You know, the book and the film have opened doors where I don't think I would normally have those opportunities. So I'm really embracing it, making the most of it, and hopefully it will build, the future 2022 and onwards.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of all about you, but a spoiler alert coming up. I wonder if you can share then with me, for those who haven't seen that particular episode, who haven't read the book like I have, in preparation and research, who don't follow you on Twitter or LinkedIn. Can you just summarize what it was like to join the police force? What is your story?
Well, I suppose local lad, really thinking, well, I'm going to be a scientist, because, my parents were very strict on me to get a good education and have a clear objective in life. So science, my parents really loved science as well. So that was a no-brainer, really. Yeah. So once I finished uni and I got a job at the Royal Free Hospital as a research scientist, I thought that was it. But that was the 80 to 83. During that time, there was the Brixton riots, and the Scarman report was published in 82. and they were talking about a reflective police service. And I must admit, I didn't even resonate with it then. I couldn't really identify with it. It was just while I was at the Royal Free, officers from Hampstead Police Station used to use our sports facilities. I didn't know there were police officers at the time. I was just meeting in the gym or the pool or whatever, and in the bar. And after a few months of getting to know them, they identify themselves as police officers, and they started convincing me that I'd be police material. I thought, wow, do I look like a racist thug? That's how I saw it. But they kept banging on about, we need people like you. You'd be a good officer. Not only you got the intellect for it, but you're physically fit and all that sort of stuff. I said, listen, I know you're trying to do. You must be some part of the recruiting campaign. But it did sort of plant a seed in my mind's eye, and I thought, wow, is this something I could do? And then a couple of people close to me, my boss and my best friend's mother, Jessie Stevens, who was a community liaison officer. Yes. I was sharing with her that these guys are approaching me about joining police, and she said, yeah, because she'd been working with police during that turbulent time of the Brixton riots and everything that came out of Scarman. And she said, well, I can't see you as a research scientist for the next 30 years, but I can see you as a police officer. I said, Mum, Aunt Jessie, that is not what I want, because I know that my identification of policing in the UK at the time was not good. I'd been in Jamaica and I'd seen black cops, so I could relate more to the black cops in Jamaica than just over here. And then my boss, Roy Pounder, the consultant, a professor of gastroenterology, he said, Leroy, I really think you could do something as remarkable as join the police. And he said he'd keep the job open for me if it doesn't work out. And so I did put in an application. And so those officers were really pleased I did it. And but while I was in the application process, my father was badly beaten up by police officers over a traffic matter. And I just couldn't understand why they would do that. Yeah. He was in his late 50s. He was a hardworking man, very law-abiding. But he would always want to know why he's been stopped. And if he had to go to court, he would fight his case. I think he was a frustrated lawyer, actually, because he'd always go not guilty and fight his case in the court. But yeah, unfortunately, they laid into him and badly beat him up. And so you can imagine the last thing I wanted to do, join the ranks of the officers who beat him up. Yes. But my wife, who was my fiance at the time, Gretel, said, well, maybe that's the reason why you should join. And then my boss was saying the same thing. Aunt Jessie was saying the same thing. And it was just doing my head in. And I was really questioning my sanity as I was going through this process. And then my dad found out I was doing it. And just like in a film, it went down really badly. But I don't know, that calling, that vision of being in the organization to make change from within just kept resonating, and I had to respond. And it was taking me out my comfort zone from a great world of science. I was going against my father's wishes because he wanted me to be a scientist, and of course, him being a victim of police beating was not. It was the worst case scenario. All right, he did successfully sue the police for unlawful arrest and excessive force, but all the same, the last thing he wanted was his son to join the ranks of those officers. But yeah, I pursued it, and it was. I was questioning my sanity for the first 10 years. I was thinking, why would I leave my comfort zone into quite a toxic, hostile environment where I was getting criticism from the community as well as criticism from my colleagues? So I was between the rock and a hard place. But I pushed through, and fortunately, history speaks for itself.
Yes, and you've been involved in, you already mentioned it, Macpherson Report, Scarman, actively trying to make impact and changes in the police force, and then setting up, founding the Black Police Association, which you chaired for 30 years. So you have made change. I'm just wondering on reflection, would you repeat that career path? Lots of young people will be listening and probably have seen the film or be Googling you now or whatever. But would you repeat that whole career, or do you think you would have stayed in science?
Yeah, well, the first line of my book actually says that your worst nightmare could be your biggest breakthrough. And I realized it was the worst case scenario. It wasn't going to be easy. It's going to be really tough. But I think the learning lesson is, if you have that calling and it's something that you have to dig deep. Don't dismiss it because it's going to be the worst case scenario. Just stick with it. You need to have a real clarity of what you're trying to do. And I knew that I wanted to make changes from within. I wasn't totally clear how I would do it. And as I said, the first 10 years of grappling with these issues on my own, from training school to say, listen, I'm here to make changes, and being seen as a bit of a troublemaker for saying that, and standing up for other people, including myself, especially around issues of race and equality. It was clear to me that I had to dig deep. My faith was a real resilience to keep strong in my principles and values, and keep focused on the vision. I'm really driven by visions. If I can see it, I can do it. So I was really pleased that there was so much opportunity there if I just really followed my dream, even though at times it was my worst nightmare. But yeah, and then obviously it all made sense when I came together with the founder members of the Black Police Association and discovered that we can make changes from within, having our own platform. And as a result of that, we set our own template to make change around race equality and inclusion and the wider diversity piece. And seeing how our impact was almost immediate when we set up officially launched in 94. And I became a member. In fact, I've been a member for 30 years. I wasn't a chair for 30 years. But being a founder member from those early days, 30 years ago, is something that I take pride in. A lot of people might think, oh, well, certain things you did has been eroded back since McPherson and giving evidence at the McPherson inquiry. But I know there's certain things that's still there. And the fact that the Black Police Association is still there 30 years later.
Yeah.
And not just in London, but right across the country, there's a national association. So for me, the legacy is there. And it doesn't matter if people want to accept institutional racism or not, even though the evidence is clear that it's still there, even though the commissioner might say it's not there, but the changes are still being made. It really gives me hope that, we really can deal with these issues once and for all. And I truly believe improve the lives of future generations.
Yes. Well, I was going to come to that because my profession at the bar, people very rarely, pupils or trainees, come to become barristers who were police officers. We do sometimes see them.
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah.
who are doctors. And so for young people now who might be thinking about their own careers, either in policing or in the Met, and of course, as in the legal sector like me, I just wondered, kind of looking again back at your experience and your own career path, whether you had some advice about resilience, persistent. We're coming through COVID. It's been absolutely dire for all, but particularly for young people who've been affected in so many ways. And so my question, I suppose, perhaps is about mental health and resilience. Any advice you would have for young people who are entering the legal profession at this stage?
Well, I think the more information you have about the profession you want to take on, or the arena in which you are going to operate in, the more information, the better. And I must admit, the way in which I looked at it is, even though it might be tough, but if you've got a clear vision of what you need to do, don't be derailed by personalities or prejudices. Have an understanding of the path that you're going to walk along, you'll need people with you, so you need support, and take wise counsel from people who can give you as much clarity. And that's why Jessie Stevens was so brilliant, because she'd worked with police and she knew that the importance of bridge building and reducing barriers. So I was feeding off her, and because I was also a local person, I knew that I was a public servant.
Yes.
So being a servant leader was, again, in line with my faith and wanting to keep a clarity and consistency on next steps, and not to be discouraged. Sometimes you'd be disappointed, but not to be discouraged, and keep going. And we all know that sometimes you have to make severe and significant sacrifices. But if you've got an understanding of your objective, you keep your eye on the prize, and you can see other people doing it, and having great role models and mentors, you can keep that momentum. And I must admit, all of these things, all these moving parts, really helps to strengthen you. For me, my family was critical in all of that. So can't do these things in isolation. You need to have good, strong fellowship and real clarity of purpose, and being intentional. I know it can sometimes be tough being self-motivated, and but I suppose we have to dig deeper if we find that we are switching off and not getting the breakthroughs. Sometimes it's no pain, no gain. So you have to be going through the tough times before you really get the harvest of all of that.
Thank you. That's such. I'm writing it down because I need it. Leroy, I want to talk about sort of a bit of positivity, if I may, because otherwise I'll start talking about the recent report into the Met.
Right.
Yeah, and so that will depress us all, and I'll be talking about the sad Sarah Everard and various other things. But I wanted to talk about a bit of positivity here, if I may, and ask you about any advice perhaps that you might have for lawyers looking back at your career, and indeed if you had a favourite fictional lawyer.
A favourite fictional, when I was a youngster, I think it was Lionel Barrymore, something like that. He was an American lawyer, and always won his case. He never lost. So but yeah, it was a fictional character in an American law setting, and I suppose they're a bit more brash, and their protocols are totally different to ours. Yes. But since I've seen barristers over here. I mean, having worked with Mike Mansfield on McPherson, and there was work around a witch hunt against the Black Police Association by our colleagues at the time, and one of my members was taken to the Old Bailey. His name was Ali Desai, and we hinged on the cornerstone of British law is innocent until proven guilty, and we supported him and working with Mike on that as well. So he sort of was the one I was closest to, and also Matthew Ryder, because when the Met was investigating me, my QC was Matthew, and my solicitor was Sadiq Khan, the current mayor of London. So I was fortunate to work with some really remarkable people. I've even worked with Arlene Small. She's a QC in family law. So over the years, I really had the opportunity to rub shoulders with really amazing people. And just to say about police officers who then become lawyers, I don't know if you know Guy Scotland. Guy, he was in the Met, and then he went to British Transport Police, and then he became a lawyer quite late on in his career. And I know he might not be practicing at the moment, but yeah, I always admired him for making that step because again, he was involved in the struggle for equality and justice in the Met and the police service across the country, through the national BPA as well. Yes. And in fact, we're neighbours. We live in East London together, so I see him from time to time.
Yes. Did you fancy the jump across? Did you fancy either becoming a solicitor or being a barrister, as the advocate as I am, or indeed politics, which some lawyers do? I mean, I've got no interest in politics. But
I toyed with the idea of making the jump, but I suppose it was the amount of things I was doing. I had a real interest in, and I was getting the sort of breakthroughs that I saw was encouraging to continue. That I didn't actually make it, but politics, I toured the idea of taking on another public role, but to be quite honest, I think I'm destined just to work locally with people. I'd still live in North East London. I'm still involved in charity work. One of the charities I set up 20 years ago called, it was the BPA Charitable Trust initially. It's now called Void Youth. It's based in Hackney. And, we're doing a lot of work with young people around safety and security and buying into the communities. In fact, we have a BTEC Level 2 program called Young Leaders for Safer Cities. And they get actual UCAS points at year 9 before they start their GCSEs, year 10, 11. We're developing a program now called Young Leaders for Sustainable Cities. So it's taking in the wider issues around communities and being environmentally friendly and sustainable communities. So we're trying to keep our focus on young people empowering themselves and know they can change their environment and not become a victim of it by knowing their rights and responsibilities and what they can assist their community with.
Wow, that's really, really impressive. So tell me, I know you've written your own book, but I want to know, what's your favorite book? It needn't be about law, because I'd like to find out what you do for your well-being and perhaps to relax.
I suppose when I was starting my autobiography, as I said, it was a labour of love starting from 2010, and it didn't get published until 10 years later. But I was looking at different writing styles, and I could really identify with Obama's Audacity of Hope.
Yeah.
Barack Obama, how he wrote that personal journey, and how he was then taking on public office as a senator, etc. It was clear to me. He gave so many signposts for resilience, for leadership, ethical leadership, for being a servant leader. He didn't use those terms as such, but that's what I got out of it. That sort of gentle warrior. You need to have that strength of character to stand firm and not allow yourself to be derailed by individuals or incidences. So I really loved that book. I mean, I really thumbed through that book. It gave me a real understanding of how to chart your course. And then I remember someone who recently died, Sidney Poitier.
Yes.
He wrote a very small book around being a father, the value of a man, something like that. Something about a man. I think it's the value of a man, it's a very small book, but it's so relevant around you as a man and what you need to understand. Sorry, the legacy of a man. That's right. The legacy of a man. And a lot of that is around your family and the relationship you've got with your family and understanding the importance of sticking with it. You might have your peaks and troughs, but you can't just jump ship at the slightest thing. We're in this very sort of quick win culture. If you don't have a quick win, then obviously it's not worth it and you move on. But sometimes you have to dig deep and graft, and it may take years. And that book really resonated with me. And then obviously the writings of Maya Angelou,
Yeah.
Those sort of amazing writers.
And then what about well-being? Because I'm kind of just getting into your mindset. As I say, I've read your book, I've done a lot of research about you, but I'm thinking entering the police force at that time, not many black officers, difficult time in general, then having the mindset to set up something that was going to be impactful and legacy, then involved in various reports and investigations. How did you keep going? How did you manage your well-being then, and how do you manage it now?
Well, I think having the parents that I had was a real blessing. I mean, I didn't really understand how blessed I was with the parents that I had until I became a police officer. They gave a clarity of thinking. They're God-fearing parents, so they consistently said, this is right, this is wrong. There was no gray area to confuse me. They set clear boundaries for me. You don't just, especially after school, you can't just run off and go and play and all that thing. You've got chores to do. You take care of your sister. You make sure that you take off your uniform, hang them up properly, do your chores, and then wait for us to come in. And then, because we were latchkey kids in those days. Yeah, so I think that discipline, and we were very modest means, so we weren't, we were living it really tough. So
Yeah.
I suppose that dogged determination was instilled in me just by seeing what my parents did and how they responded, how they kept going, and they wouldn't allow people to, in any way, undermine them or derail them. They just kept going, and you copy what you see. When you've got parents who are your role models and your inspiration. And I suppose that's why my dad identified with me when he realized that I was still going to join, even though what had happened to him. He did support me because he saw that strength of character, that conviction that he saw in himself. And he's thinking, well, this young man means business. So, got to support him.
Yeah.
And I've done similar things with my family when I've seen that they really want to go down that road. Just be as supportive as possible. And then that in itself can encourage you and give you that validation and say you're on the right track and push it through. But I must admit, when I was getting a hard time in those early years in the police service, I couldn't complain to my dad because he would have said, we'll tell if we do it anyway. He said, you force yourself in there, you deal with it. So I couldn't even complain to him. I mean, I could complain to my wife at the time, Gretel. And Aunt Jessie, she was a real inspiration. She said, listen, even though you're getting a hard time for the community and your colleagues, stick to the objective and don't allow it to grind you down. So I think the family and the friends that I had just gave me that encouragement. I wasn't reliant on friends in the organization because I had some really strong friendships from school, from college, in Hackney, from uni, all these sort of places. So, and just the camaraderie of youngsters in the 70s and 80s, where we all held together. From the 60s, 70s, and 80s. That for me, that I'm trapped in that era, and the music and everything. That for me, it just gave me so much encouragement. And I suppose it's all about timing as well. The timing of when I joined, there were other Black recruits. Because of the recruitment campaign from the Scarman report. And it so happened, my best friend Lee from school, he had started his musical career over here in the UK with his group called Imagination. And he went really big very quickly in that same time I was joining. And he bought a house literally 5 minutes walk from Hendon Training School. And it was a godsend because I hated the food in Hendon. I lost so much weight. And when he was in town, after doing the studies for the day, I would run up to his house and go and eat some proper food, and enjoy it. And Steve McQueen highlighted that. I must admit, it really kept me grounded and say, listen, you're not alone. Your friends are still here for you. They might not totally agree with you. They do now because it's gone through the decades, and they've seen that I'm still the determined person I've always been. As I say, miserable as well. But when you've got that focus of mind and determination, you can come across as a bit, a bit miserable and a bit dour. He's a bit always focused. But that's I suppose, the cost of being determined to push things through.
Yes. Well, Leroy, you touched on something there which was really interesting, because one of the issues are having allies and having friends in our job. And people say, we don't need all these associations of, I set up a women's organization. It's not just for women. We've got lots of male members. You set up a black police officers association. There are black organizations for various different sectors. How important do you think having allies are? Was that important in your career?
Absolutely. I was really, again, fortunate that one of my first ally in Hendon, he was the class captain. I was deputy class captain. And Tom Pearson was just absolutely amazing. He got me through Hendon as well. Lee got me through the food and the cultural competence. Tom got me through the logistics of being a really well turned out officer. He helped me really learn the lines parrot fashion, because I wasn't used to it. When you do a degree, you don't have to learn things parrot fashion. It's discuss this and explore that. But Tom got my mind round learning things, or being able to recite it or narrate it and write it on paper, whatever it may be. And he got me to pull up my shoes and iron my shirt. So he was an amazing ally. And he was a white guy, and admittedly his wife was from Germany. So I think that brought him out of just being very UK centric. Yeah. So that allyship even got reignited since the film. He got in touch through Twitter, and it was absolutely amazing. When those sort of things happen, they're life changing. And so many other people came to my attention from the film and the book. So allyship, I think, is really important. I suppose even when we set up the Black Police Association, our assessment of Black is not actually on colour. The actual definition is around the shared and common experience of people of African Caribbean, and Asian origins. So you can be white and be a member. I mean, especially if you're in a mixed heritage relationship and you've got a mixed heritage son or daughter or children or whatever, and you can identify with what your children's going through, or even your partner is going through. Yes. And so we knew that sort of allyship was critical, and it's still in our constitution now, because we know the importance of people coming from different perspectives. Obviously, you might get the odd saboteur or people even undermining what you're trying to do. Some who even look like me, but you have to be able to see how they get to know what we're there for. It's a we and not a me. You can't put your personal agenda before the greater good. So it's around relationships. It's understanding that the wider brief we got, the wider experience, the wider spectrum of people involved, it will really make such a difference. And it has. And I suppose that's why it's got the sustainability and the capacity to keep going for 30 years. And I suppose it then leads itself to the Black Lives Matter issue, and how, again, to see young people, especially across the spectrum, culturally, ethnicity, their experiences have been such a, I think it's really enhanced the impact they've had. And getting private and public sector organizations to rethink on so many fronts. And I suppose the book that was produced by Lenny Henry and Marcus Ryder, Matthew's brother, around Black British Lives Matter. And I was able to write the police perspective in that book of 19 different authors. And that was published in November just gone. Yeah. So, for me, allyship is critical. And the wider, the better.
Yes. No, Alexandra Wilson's in that book. I love that book. So it's a great anthropology, if you like. I think it's a fantastic book. Marcus Ryder, of course, is not in law. Matthew is.
Yeah.
But it's really good to see the cross section. Leroy, I'm coming to the end now of our time together, and I want to ask you two things, if I may. One, what advice would you have to your 21-year-old self? I've been writing a lot of books about careers and skills and so on. That I didn't know anybody who was a barrister when I was starting out, or police officer for that matter. And I just wonder if you could just look back to your younger self, what would you have told that Leroy, 21 or younger? Just take a moment to reflect on it. And then I wanted to ask you, what's next? You've got an autobiography, we've got a film made by, an Oscar-winning director. You've chaired a really successful association. So advice to your 21-year-old self, and what next? Because I know you chair Transition to Adulthood.
Yes, yes.
So that's one of the things you're doing. So I wonder if you could share that with us.
Well, my 21 self, I would say, definitely have a mentor in the organization, or someone similar, just to really give you a lot more in-depth understanding of the terrain you're going to be operating in. So I would have definitely have done that. I know mentors were spoken about, but I don't think a young person from my background in London, and it's quite humble beginnings, we really understood the importance of social capital and social networking and the wider benefits of that. So I'd definitely give myself a mentor with that real cultural understanding, that cultural competence to really assist me. And then what's next? Well, I'm actually trying to finish a children's book. I'm mindful that children's books are mainly from a white European perspective. Yep. Less than 5% of children's books are from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, and from Black males is even less. So I'm really looking at that. So I've put in a couple of bids to publishers, and we'll see what happens. But I've already formulated it. I'm doing a script on a next steps, further episodes around the small acts. So I'm working with some script writers on that. As you've already mentioned, transition to adulthood. Yes. And that work around young people from 18 to 25 and understanding the challenges they go through and the lack of services they have, and the disproportionality in the justice system that they suffer from. So I'm really enjoying being part of that organization, and there's various partners. I'm still doing my work with Voyage, even though I'm a patron. I'm not the chair anymore, but I was with them as recently as Friday. They're just down the road from me in Hackney. So I'm still doing my activism and advocacy work. I've got a security consultancy that's doing some international work at the moment. So I'm actually gainfully employed. I recently celebrated my 65th birthday. So wow. I was really pleased to get that landmark. And I feel fitter and very positive about the future. I'm not sitting back on my laurels and say, I cracked that. And success is around successes, and the work of Voyage. I want to make sure I've got successes in my own home, and despite the challenges, we've got to keep going. Working with other agencies, like the Bar Council and their race plan. I've already made it clear that I'm more than happy to assist, because we all want to be on the right side of history, and not just for out there. I want to be on the right side of history to my grandchildren. So if my grandson or my granddaughter say, "Well, Granddad, what did you do? And how are you making things better?" As they sometimes do ask me, because I don't want my grandchildren's generation, and they're 7 years old and below. I don't want their generation to go through the same inequalities and injustices as their parents' generation, or my generation, or even my parents, or my parents' generation. So, the struggle continues as long as I've got health and strength and that self-motivation and that dogged determination. I suppose just being current. I was on Newsnight last night around this whole issue around policing and can you trust police and these issues that the IOPC just brought up and the whole raft of disasters from one thing or another. Did an interview just before this with ITV. So, as long as I'm current and I'm relevant and people can identify with the commentary, then, I believe I've got a story to be told. I've got things to be shared, and hopefully people can identify with them.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love you to come and talk about pure law. I saw you last night on Newsnight, and that whole report and the trust issues which are ever continuing and being highlighted on the Law and Guidance podcast, because I think your input will be quite interesting there. But I'm really grateful for you joining me this afternoon, hearing your fascinating story and account and your wonderful career. So thank you so much for talking law with me, Sally Penni.
Well, it's been a great pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully we'll, our paths will cross again very soon.
A big thank you to Dr. Leroy Logan MBE for talking law with me, Sally Penni MBE, in this interview. If you would like to support Talking Law, then please do get in touch. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram, or look for Women in the Law UK. I also have 2 new books available which I hope might assist your careers: Talking Law and Skills and Talking Law and Careers, both of which are available on Amazon. I have a new book out called A Practical Guide to Dealing with Vulnerable Witnesses in the Criminal Courts and Beyond. You can find that available on Amazon, published by Law Brief Publishing. Do make sure you catch up with previous episodes of this podcast, where you can hear my interviews with guests such as former President of the Supreme Court of England and Wales, Baroness Hale of Richmond, and leading criminal barrister Courtney Griffiths, QC. Thanks to our production team, Sam Walker and Michael Blades at What Goes On Media. I'm Sally Penni. Bye for now.